America's presence in the Middle East over the last 40 years has been full of what our next guest argues were avoidable failures. Stephen Simon served as Senior Director for Middle Eastern and North African Affairs on the Obama National Security Council, following years of experience in prior administrations going all the way back to Ronald Reagan. In his new book, Grand Delusion, The Rise and Fall of American Ambition in the Middle East, he explores U.S. foreign policy through 4 decades in the region. Stephen, thank you so much for joining us.
It's a pleasure.
Okay, so you write about the ramp-up recently when we talk about U.S. involvement in the Middle East, which began in earnest, really, with the Reagan administration. And you write specifically that often meant, quote, applying military solutions to fundamentally political and diplomatic problems. How did that early framing really help shape what we would see for the subsequent decades as far as U.S. policy in the Middle East?
Well, it played out largely in the form of successive American administrations, Republican and Democrat, didn't really matter which, applying grand ideas that held a great deal of meaning for those administrations and maybe Americans more generally, but were unrelated to the facts on the ground out in the Middle East. And the attempt to apply those ideas to those incompatible realities in the Middle East led to successive disasters, and not just for the United States, but for the people of the Middle East as well.
And if we go back, you really critique the handling of the war, the Gulf War, basically as a lead up to the invasion of Iraq in 2003. Why do you feel it was so problematic?
It was deeply problematic for a couple of reasons. The first is that we don't know if the first war with Iraq was avoidable. You'll recall that was because Saddam Hussein, the Iraqi dictator, invaded Kuwait. The U.S. administration then of George H.W. Bush decided immediately that that invasion of Kuwait would have to be reversed through the use of force, even though many people thought that they were alternative courses of action. The problem was that, having decided on the use of force, the military plan that governed the war wasn't followed through. And as a result, Saddam Hussein ended up in a very strong military position after the war.
We're now 20 years from the start of the war in Iraq and Afghanistan. We see the critical toll, devastating really for the civilians in both countries. Looking back now, how could both of those wars have been more successful?
Well, that's a very troubling question. I think the first war would have been more successful if the United States had gone all the way and simply dislodged Saddam at the time, back in 1991. Or, alternatively, having ejected Saddam from Kuwait, then said, well, listen, what we're going to do now is have a military embargo on Iraq, but otherwise not mess with Iraq any further. That was the second of 2 available approaches. I think either one would have made life simpler for succeeding administrations and probably made it very unlikely that after 9/11, George W. Bush would invade Iraq. The result was that after 9/11, Iraq was there in George W. Bush's gun sights when he was looking for a way to respond to the al-Qaeda attack on the United States on 9/11.
Lately, we've been seeing this increase in violence, clashes between the Israelis and Palestinians, especially under this latest Netanyahu government. What, if any, role do you think that the U.S. needs to play in trying to keep peace in the Middle East?
You know, there's not a whole lot the United States can do. The Israelis are now trying to figure out what kind of state they're going to have down the road, what kind of a state that they've been building until now, and what will it look like and how will it serve its citizens down the road. This is an issue that only Israelis themselves can decide. The United States can't intervene meaningfully.
Lately, we've been seeing China start to get involved in the Middle East. What's the end game there?
I think the end game there is that China is going to be a very important player in Gulf affairs. The Chinese export colossal amounts of oil from both Iran and Saudi Arabia. And the Chinese need that oil. China's economy is growing by leaps and bounds. Its middle class is growing. And at least for the next 10 to 20 years, Chinese demand for oil is going to be powerful. So, the Saudis and the Iranians have got to pay attention to that. So I think the proper stance for the United States is to say, okay, there's a silver lining here. We're going to have a peaceful Persian Gulf. We're not worried about a Chinese military threat in the Persian Gulf. That doesn't seem to be in the cards. But the Chinese are in a position to keep the Iranians and Saudis from each other's throats, and that's a good thing.
Hopefully you're right about the silver lining there. Stephen Simon, we thank you so much for joining us. The new book, Grand Delusion, The Rise and Fall of American Ambition in the Middle East, is available now wherever books are sold.
Hi, everyone. George Stephanopoulos here. Thanks for checking out the ABC News YouTube channel. If you'd like to get more videos, show highlights, and watch live event coverage, click on the right over here to subscribe to our channel. And don't forget to download the ABC News app for breaking news alerts. Thanks for watching.